And you're very welcome along to OTB Sports Sunday Paper Review. It's Richie McCormack here with you, and I am delighted to say I'm joined by independent sports writer Michael Verney and also the chief sports writer with the Irish Daily Star, Kieran Cunningham. Going to bring you through the back pages and indeed some of the front on this Sunday afternoon. Just Too Good is on the back of the Irish Daily Mail on Sunday, talking about Leinster steamrolling Ulster by 27 points to 5 in last night's Pro 14 final. On the independent sports section, Salah strikes, sinks Leeds, and it's a bowing Mo Salah after his hat-trick performance got the better of Leeds United in the Premier League last night. And also John Green saying GAA count costs of staggering losses, €70 million of a hole is what the GAA are apparently facing this year due to COVID-19. We'll start with the front page of the Sunday Times in terms of their headlines today. FAI paid €1 million to cover Delaney's personal bills. This is of course taken from the first extract of Champagne Football, the book by Mark Tighe and Paul Rowan, all about the Delaney era in charge of the FAI. Then the Sunday Times sports section itself. Salah saves the day. Liverpool striker hits hat-trick as Leeds push champions to the limit in Anfield. Thriller. And also GAA approves championships this autumn. The news from the Ord Corley yesterday coming through to us that we will have GAA championships this autumn. We'll touch on that I'm sure in the next few minutes. What a Bielsa is what the Sunday World have gone with on the back of their paper today. First day thriller as Reds steal all 3 points at the death. 2 penalties for Mo Salah yesterday doing the business for them. The big red Mo Sheen, the wonderfully pleasant face of Mo Salah again. Super Salah hat-trick saves champions, as Klopp says we're lucky to have him. And it's easy to see why Koeman is a massive admirer. Apparently, according to Simon Mullock, Barcelona still sniffing around the Egyptian king of Anfield. Flaw 3, Salah treble rescues Kop after Virgil van Dijk howler, says the back of the Sun Sports today. And on the back of the Sun Sports, the Daily Star even Sunday, Incredible, Old Trafford boss Solskjaer is in for Gareth after Sancho deadlock. They're looking to swoop for Gareth Bale. Real Madrid apparently saying they'll cover half his wages earlier this week. And here we Mo again. Salah treble Spurs Klopp and Co's blushes. But perhaps most importantly is the front page of the Irish Daily Star today. Question of Sport trio axed. That's right, on the eve of the 50th anniversary of the legendary sports quiz on BBC, Matt Dawson, Sue Barker and Phil Tufnell are gone. It's difficult not to start there, but we will start, I guess, with the Premier League. We've got 2 games, of course, live on OTB Sports this afternoon. Kenny and Steve are going to be doing West Brom Leicester. We've got Spurs Everton a little bit later on as well, with Brian Kerr and Nathan Murphy. On the Spurs front, Ollie Holt, not a fan of Jose Mourinho, if today's column in the Mail on Sunday is anything to go by. There's an inconvenient truth, writes Ollie, that sits in the corner of the changing room, the manager's office, the treatment room, the canteen and the boardroom at Tottenham, like a giant elephant throughout the elongated Daniel Levy, Jose Mourinho vanity project that is the Amazon Prime documentary series All or Nothing. It's a trite title anyway, a generic name for what often appears to be a scripted reality show that is a poor man's Made in Chelsea. Scathing stuff from Ollie Holtz today. Not a fan of Jose, not a fan of the reality series that's been based around Tottenham. I don't want to say it's entirely indicative of what went on during that season last year with Jose brought in to replace Mauricio Pochettino. But Kieran, I kind of guess it shows what level Mourinho is thought of now by the I guess the dedicated and the experienced scribes in England. He's no longer this guy who's going to bring massive entertainment and bring winning football to whatever club he's at. Diminished returns have very much set in, and he's not the man he used to be.
Yeah, it's remarkable really, when you look at this CV and what he's done over the years. Like he's enjoyed incredible success. Like I think it's 20 years next week since he took on his first manager job, and that was with Benfica. And then the kind of success he had at a huge different clubs and clubs of varying sizes, like Chelsea, like Real Madrid, Inter Milan. And now he is regarded as an off-the-ramp. Nobody's been talking of them as top 4 contenders. A few interesting things here. Like Frank Lampard, one of his proteges, and he's been talked up by a lot of people, but during the week. In the Premier League era, 15 managers have won the Premier League. 11 won the Premier League. On average, they had 15 years experience managing when they won their first title in England. So generally the trend is towards very senior managers. Mourinho actually bucked the trend. He only had a few years when he was with Chelsea, but at the same time, He'd already won the Champions League, he'd already won the UEFA Cup, already won the Portuguese title. He had pedigree. So you have Chelsea this season, and they've spent more heavily than any other season under Abramovich, spent 200 million sterling. So there's huge expectation of them. One of the things that yesterday reminded me of Richie, it's only 7 weeks the Premier League finished. You kind of forget how horrible it is. It is a reality show when games are on social media. Like, I watched Liverpool, it was hugely enjoyable. Even the tweets and all that. I think there should be some kind of automatic thought that anybody with an affinity towards Liverpool and Manchester United cannot go on social media while they're playing half an hour after. Because it just gets so tribal. Like, Virgil went a mistake. So straight away you see all this stuff. He's overrated. It's a mistake which every player and every sport makes. So everybody makes mistakes. You can't get away from all this noise around. It's something that's a reminder that there can be entertainment. You know, that Mo Salah is one of the great things with sport. He was sensational. Get away 2 goals or penalty. He had 85 points. He had, a third of those blocks. Like, he was irrepressible.
Yeah.
Like, he's still stands underrated. They think, oh, get rid of him and get happy. But the Mourinho thing, like, the bits I've seen of that show was typical Mourinho. It's just him playing to the gallery, playing to the cameras. It's a waste of time.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Michael, would you expect anything different from a Jose Mourinho fronted documentary, that he would be the star of the show and kind of playing to the gallery, as Kieran puts it there?
Yeah, no more than, I suppose, with people saying about The Last Dance, so it was Michael Jordan painting himself in the best light possible. If they're going to put something out like this, Mourinho is going to be painted in the best light possible. Just a couple of interesting lines from Ollie Holt's piece. He just says about Daniel Levy. Levy's a bit David Brent, a little bit too pleased with himself, a little bit of a star lover. Find me someone who looks at me the way he looks at Mourinho. It's usually the second season when they learn. Sadly, that inferno is going to come too late for all or nothing. Even Mourinho is not without likeable moments, although he acts like a man who swears to try to impress the cool kids, not because he feels it. Just another interesting line here as well. Levy is part of the support cast in orbit around the star obviously being Mourinho, and the players are extras living in a Jose wonderland, except it's a wonderland that's Blackpool on a dreary day. And it is it's a weird one. Yeah, like it's all about the chase for sixth place, really. And and they're becoming, as I said, like, Spurs are becoming bit part players again since Pochettino finished up, and it's hard to see them. It's hard to see them being anything other than bit part players again. Really, like the realistic chance of, like, silverware, be it big European cups or Premier League, seems miles away now. But yeah, as Ollie Holt says, it seems like a bit of a vanity project. Maybe Mourinho, I don't know, maybe trying to rewrite his image a small bit, maybe because he's looked out of touch maybe in recent years. But yeah, definitely a vanity project on his part, and I'm sure he signed off on everything and was happy with everything before it went to screen.
Kieran, I'll bring you back in here. Hopefully the issues with your line have been corrected a little bit. There's a key line for me in this from Holt, which I guess touches on what Mourinho has become, I guess, over the last 3 years or so, saying the truth is that Mourinho is a camouflage. That is the main purpose he serves now, both on the small screen and at a football club. The force of his personality, the glare of his charisma, and the skill of his management hide a supporting cast of weakness and problems. Look at the bright shining star and try to ignore the fact that the team are fading away into the nothingness outside the top four. And that's basically what it seems like for me now. He's a more glamorous Sam Allardyce, in a way that teams would bring in an Allardyce, etc., to guide them away from relegation, to galvanise the squad for the last 10 games of the season and get them out of trouble. What Mourinho does now is to offer this gloss of, another world, a kind of a fake. He's that kind of gold flake that you get on stuff that isn't actually gold. It just makes it look like it is, and kind of makes you pretend that it is, and forget that the underlying problems are actually a bit crappy underneath and need more care and attention than someone like Mourinho is probably going to give them. Yeah.
I think he mentions in that piece, Oliver Holt, Daniel Levy coming across as, I think he says, a star lover, star kisser or something.
Star-crossed lover, yeah.
He's dazzled by Mourinho's aura. And I think that's been the case with a few clubs, that they just see the CV, but they don't recognise that the way his methods and the way he says football, it doesn't really tally with the way the most successful teams play. And a lot of these things sometimes are cyclical. Like in a few years, somebody might play in a very Mourinho type style and end up winning a big prize again. The moment it doesn't seem to be working, the people seem to have found that out or moved on from it. And you just wonder, like, what Tottenham, the players seemed pretty keen to get Mourinho in. And you just wonder what they were thinking. Like, we don't know enough about what Pochettino wrote a book, but he didn't tell us a huge amount about what it's like behind the scenes, and he wasn't keen on this documentary series either. Mourinho was saying to Harry Kane, you can be the best in the world, you can be up there with Ronaldo and Messi, and is that what does Harry Kane even believe that?
It's
I don't know.
I want to touch on something that you mentioned there. Yes, I saw you mention it online, and you touched on it there before we brought in Mick, that social media is a curse when it comes to watching Premier League games. I don't think it's just limited to, you mentioned just Liverpool and Manchester United fans there. I think it's everybody. Social media, I saw Dominic King, the Merseyside journalist, was saying that the people were writing catastrophic things about Liverpool's performance yesterday, when in reality they probably just need to work on their defence for a week or two and they'll be fine. Never mind bringing in 4 or 5 50, 60 million pound stars. There's an impatience that's grown out of watching football that's on social media.
If you read what Klopp had to say, he said, they're just back from an international break with a couple of training sessions. The defending is just... It's true. If you look at opening fixtures in the Premier League over the first 3 or 4 games, they're often very high scoring. People then get into the rhythm of it. Often it doesn't seem to the second international November, whenever it is this year, that they get into more of a rhythm. People, it's just hysteria. You can't. People won't give credit. It's always mistakes. Like Leeds United played really well, scored 3 very good goals. The Van Dijk one, the one Van Dijk's mistake was a big error. The other 2, you could say they were huge errors. You could point to something, but you have to give the attacking team credit as well. There's always too much of a readiness. Ship him out, and we need Thiago. He'll sort everything out, or we need another 80 million centre half.
Mick, how do you view games like this? Do you get impatient when the team doesn't perform? Do you lash out on social media?
No, I definitely don't. I think we're far too reactionary now. As Kieran says, we're looking for hysteria. We're looking for... We can't see this in a bigger picture. It's the first game of the season. No more than, like if Kilkenny get beaten by 10 points in the first game of the league, that doesn't mean Brian Cody should go or that they have nobody coming through. We're just far too reactionary. It's a long game now. Like Liverpool... Like in a way, you're probably still celebrating winning the Premier League and having such a good season, and it's coming so quickly now. I think they'd be happy with just getting a result. But it can just be. I find it funny now because I'm not a mad soccer lover, so I kind of find all the hysteria on Twitter kind of funny because it doesn't really mean anything to me, and I can just kind of almost laugh at the way they run away with themselves. I might do similar maybe with GAA, but I'd say I'd probably keep my thoughts to myself. But I just think we're far too reactionary. Even in the media now, it's like, as I said, if Kilkenny lose the first 2 games of the league, should Brian Cody be gone? Absolutely ridiculous. No more than if Virgil van Dijk makes a mistake yesterday, he's not the best defender in the world anymore. Of course he still is. He made one mistake in a game, and Liverpool were good enough to still recover and win. Yeah, but just listen, that's what Twitter is. Twitter can be great, and social media can be great, but it definitely has its downfalls as well.
That kind of stuff has crept into GAA talk, though. Like I distinctly remember, Cody's actually a prime example, whereby if they haven't been successful, and like a limited number of games is one thing, but if they're not contending for an All-Ireland, if they haven't made it to a semi-final, that talk begins of, is it time for a change? And is he yesterday's man? Is he time to move on? And a lot of GAA coaching and a lot of high-level managers like that, whereby they might have a year or two of a fallow period, as you might call it in farming terms, like they'll actually come back stronger, and they'll come back stronger for it, and they're all the better for not having that hubbub around them of social media pressure and forums going on, banging on about them, and whether or not they should bring in a sign. And they're actually allowed a bit of elbow room in which to perform their work and get on with the meat and potatoes of coaching.
Yeah, see, social media has given that pub talk that always existed. That now exists on social media now, where it didn't 10 or 15 years ago. But yeah, like Cody's a classic one. Like people can point to the fact that Kilkenny haven't won All Ireland since 2015, whereas I would say their league victory in 2018 and their defeat of the reigning All Ireland and Munster champions last year in the All Ireland semi final. They're two of his best results that he's had since he walked in the door in late 1998. You know, so like you can brand it one way. You can say he hasn't won an All Ireland in 5 years, or you can look a bit closer and see that they're rebuilding, and he's actually probably doing a masterful job. But yeah, everybody has a voice now. It's kind of funny listening to some of them, but if you're in that bubble, if you're a manager, like I'd say he's happy that he's not on social media or not paying any attention to any of that, and he never really has, but it definitely would creep in with players and with other backroom team members now. There's so much more pressure on now. There's so much... people just don't want to wait for anything. They don't want to wait for a win. They don't want to wait for success. They don't want to wait for anything. They expect it to come now. And that's probably one of the reasons why managers are going out the door an awful lot quicker with pressure that's coming on, and even social media pressure that can turn into an absolute storm and help to lead to somebody going out the door in a job.
There's other pressures as well, touched upon in Dermot Crowe's piece in The Independent today. He's mentioned about club teams essentially looking from outside their boundaries for coaches and so on. That often the outsider is actually best for a close-knit club, and you see people who are almost undone by the pressure of working from within and having to go about their day-to-day business in a club whereby they're surrounded by those people that they have to pick and they have to train day by day, and oftentimes they are forced to look outside the clubs, but it comes at a cost as well, doesn't it, Mick?
Definitely, yeah. There's a couple of interesting things on that. I picked up the Sunday Independent this morning. I didn't expect to see my own club manager Barry Whelan pictured here, so I looked into it a bit closer. And my old Burr manager Johnny Pilkington is quoted in the piece as well. There's some interesting stuff here. So like I see Barry's obviously a stalwart of our club in Burr and would have hurled with Burr for 20 years, and obviously the Whelan family synonymous with Burr and Offaly hurling and known on the national stage. But when you're a club manager and you're from that town, those faceless people that we see on social media, you know, criticising Cody or criticising whoever, they're the people that you're meeting on the street in your own town every day. They're the people, like, you can't get away from it when you're in a town. People are giving you advice. People are telling you should be doing this. You should be playing this side here. You should be doing this, that, whatever. You're meeting that every day. And that comes with an awful lot of pressure too. You would see there are very few, you know, native club managers from that town or from that village that would stay there for an awful long time. And again, the old classic case of a prophet is rarely appreciated in his own land as well, and they maybe go somewhere else where they're kind of coming into that area, coaching that team or whatever, and they don't have that pressures of living there. Just on that as well, there's an interesting one actually. Lockmore Castellini from Tipperary booked their place in the Tipperary football final yesterday. They're an unbelievable story because they're a classic dual club and they have the same manager actually for hurling and football. So they won the two in 2013, and Frankie McGrath has brought them back to the hurling and football finals. And that's a case of what you were kind of hinting at there is like the expenses and everything that comes with, you know, these outside managers. Whereas there you have a lad who's a native from Lockmore Castellini, and they're training hurling and football on the same night. So they're not doing hurling one night, football another night. They could start the warm up with hurling. They could do the rest of the session in football and then do vice versa the next night, and they're training 2 or 3 nights a week, and it's working unbelievably well. But what you were hinting at there is there's quotes here from the Tullamore chairman, Tom Martin, and he's talking about he just says, appointing from within has its drawbacks. As Martin concedes, he says, in terms of performance assessment, you have a stronger hand with an external, but you're paying them more. If you look across the board in clubs, when you see that what some clubs are bringing in to train teams and from where they're obviously paying serious money to buy success, or whatever way you want to describe it. I know for a fact, because I have friends in other clubs, that some bring an entourage, and this is definitely true. That could be 150 to 200 euro a night, and I've heard much bigger figures than that. And if you look at training sessions in a match, that's close to 750 to 800 euro a week. And then in some cases, clubs and players are delighted with that, and you're delighted to have an inter-county style package, and they will do anything. They'll do own fundraisers themselves, they'll wash cars, they'll do whatever they have to do, and they'll forego any expenses if they're driving back from anywhere. But then you have other places where there's almost like a merry-go-round, where it's the same faces you see bouncing around from club to club within counties, within a relatively close radius. And the clubs, they mightn't necessarily be bringing silverware to the club, and they could be leaving them with a fairly hefty financial burden as they leave. And just actually, Pat Spillane kind of brings in that in the Sunday World as well. He just says, also, from watching games on the telly from many different counties, I'm struck by the number of good clubs who have managers and coaches, not just from outside their club, but outside their county too. Last weekend, I saw a man coaching a club team on a club football team on a Saturday night, and there he was on the Sunday afternoon back on the sideline looking after a hurling team. The pandemic has clearly stopped the inter-county expenses juggernaut, but it hasn't stopped at a club level, and that's true somewhat too. Like, the clubs cannot, like, whatever about counties, clubs cannot afford to be paying that sort of money. Like, you have to think, if you're going out selling lotto tickets on a Saturday night and you're bringing in 200 or 300 quid, that could be basically paying for your club manager and his entourage for one session. So clubs can end up under serious strain bringing in outside managers, but they do tend to probably have a better record when it comes to success because they're not bringing that baggage with them as well.
Kieran, I'll bring you back in here because that's not sustainable in the modern world. Like we saw today on the front page of the sports section of the Sindo, John Green's quoting figures of that the GAA are going to find themselves without this year. What is it? The GAA are going to be counting the staggering cost of the coronavirus crisis, 70 million of a hole the association's going to find themselves in. Obviously that trickles its way down to the clubs and the county boards. That kind of thing of paying up to 800 quid a week for a training package for a club, that's going to have to dry up fairly quickly, you would imagine, or it's not going to be sustainable.
Well, I would think there's a huge reckoning coming to the GAA financial side because of the impact of this year, because we don't know what impact is going to happen in 2021 either. I was supposed to talk to you about the Olympics, and you look at all the stuff that's been said around then, and a lot of people around Tokyo in political circles and sporting circles still aren't convinced to go ahead next year. So how can we be confident we'll have sport in Ireland next year? Back at anything like full pelt, if that's the feeling across the world. And, I think there's no way that the kind of spending that's been going on over the last few years can be sustainable, because the funds won't be there. Like, particularly in rural Ireland, it's been hit really hard. And it's the same people that people go to for the money all the time that would go to look at the fundraise, and counties are looking at the fundraise, and they simply don't have the money to dig out. So I think you will see a return to more managers from inside clubs and inside counties, that the people who are on the circuit and have been making a bit of, allegedly making a few quid out of it anyway, you may find that dries up, that there might be the same demand. Like, it's been an extraordinary situation. Like, you have some managers that manage county teams, they also manage club teams, they manage college teams. Like, there's no suggestion any of them are getting paid, but there are people who spread themselves around a bit, So there's so many things coming together with the GAA. Like, there's a deal to be renegotiated with the GPA. There's a club situation. There's a split season. That the GAA has changed more in the last 20 years than the 100 years before that. And it's changed in dramatic ways. And I think in the next 5 years, it's going to change even more dramatically. That the financial situation would be part of the impetus, but there's an impetus there for change anyway, with the split season, with the way the inter-county juggernaut got out of control, etc. So I don't think anybody could describe what the GAA will be like in 5 years' time. Yeah,
they're going to be helped somewhat by the fact that they yesterday gave the go-ahead to the All-Ireland Championships, which will be getting underway in October. Stephen O'Brien touches on this on the front page of the main part of the Sunday Times today, saying crowds of at least 5,000 are going to be allowed to attend big games at stadiums such as Croke Park and the Aviva Stadium under new rules to bring spectators to live sporting events. The limit of 200 might be raised to 500 at the club matches over the course of the next while. But essentially, if I'm reading between the lines here, if the GAA have come out yesterday and said that the championships are going to go ahead, Michael, and that today we're hearing the crowds such as 5,000 are going to be allowed at the Aviva, they're going to want to clear not some of their debts, but they're going to want to get some money in the door. And you can see most championship matches at intercounty level being moved to the big ground within that area. So I'd imagine Porky Queeve and Semple Stadium are going to be in use later on this year for intercounty games. Croke Park is going to swallow up the majority of the Leinster Championship, you would imagine, and possibly beyond as well, because they need to start getting money in the gates.
Yeah, they need to get something in the door. Yeah, I think it was always going to be the case with a winter championship, not even just from a spectator point of view, but just from a pitch and facilities point of view, that the pitches are going to really start cutting up and it's going to get very heavy. We're probably going to have an awful lot of rain. It's going to be very soft. Whereas Croke Park, Thurles, Nolan Park, Portlaoise, these type of places, they're just better equipped to look after and take an awful lot of traffic. But they're definitely going to want to try and get, like, the year has nearly been written off financially to some extent, and they're just trying to, anything they can get into the coffers, I'm sure they're going to take. So if they can get, be it a couple of hundred or a couple of thousand in by the end of the year, I definitely think they're going to take it. Just interesting as well on the front, Michael Foley had it here. It was actually reported by RT on Friday, just some of the restrictions that are going to be limited for the county championships, or for the inter-county championships when they start. So there's going to be no overnight camps, and there'll be a cap on 32 players on a training panel, 26 for match days, with 11 backroom staff allowed for each squad, which is going to be interesting for particularly some of the bigger counties who have at least double that on match day, at least. And some of them, as Liam Sheedy said last year, when he was over Tip in 2010, they had one bus. Now they have two to take in for all the backroom team as well. So that's going to be an interesting change too. Players will be encouraged to travel to games individually, stay with the same household if they can at all, household members, and they'll be there 3 hours before games. No overnight stays, unless the venue is 130 miles away. And dressing rooms will be available again. I was actually chatting to Jamie Malone last week, the Clare player, and he was just saying he played a club championship match last Sunday evening, and he had to drive straight back to Dublin after with no showers or anything like that, which is not, that's not been health conscious at all. So I think the fact that at least the dressing rooms will be back open, there'll only be a handful of lads maybe that might need to use the showers or whatever, but it's important that they have that option there, and that there's no deterrent for lads to be involved in inter-county. Yeah,
we'll move on to the other page, the other stories on the front page of the Times today. Which is the first part of the serialisation of Champagne Football, the book by Mark Tighe and Paul Rowing, which documents the final days, I guess, of the John Delaney administration at the FAI. Basically outlines the expenditure that was going on at the time, saying the FAI's expenditure on Delaney included $316,000 in legal fees for defamation cases he took in relation to the Rio ticketing scandal in 2016. Separate legal costs, they've gotten hold of the Cozy accounts, it seems, amounting to $200,000 were also discovered. Cozy found that the FAI paid $70,000 for Delaney's 50th birthday party, although a later report from Accounts Mazars commissioned by the FAI put the association's bill at more than $80,000. It says later on, though, obviously enough, that John Delaney paid back somewhere in the region of $50,000 for that 50th birthday party. But it just seems, Kieran, like we have happily moved, like COVID's going to have an impact on finances everywhere. I don't think any association is going to be okaying 50 or 80 grand for a chief executive's 50th birthday party again anytime soon, and I think the country's probably better off for it.
Yeah, like when you read the extracts, like there's more detail about that party, but a lot of this was through the reporting of Mark Tighe and Paul Rowan that have been out there before. I think this book will be a very interesting read because they'll just gather everything together in one place, and just lay it all out. Like I would expect most of the meat of it they've put out there in their day job in the Sunday Times, so they want to be holding back a huge amount. But that 50th birthday party, like if you read the descriptions of it, it's like something like the Sun King in Versailles, 250 years ago, or Studio 54 in New York in the 70s. You expect John Delaney and Emma English to ride in white horses. But I find it a bit odd. Like it suits really a lot of the extract of Eamon Dunphy's recollection. And Eamon was there with his wife, Jane Gogan, and he's quite scathing about John Delaney and his behaviour and the way he was with Emma English on the day. But, there's a bit of revisionism with Eamon on this. Like Eamon, I argued, like Eamon's worked with us for the guts of 20 years, and I argued with Eamon a lot of times about John Delaney. And it took a long, long time for the scales to fall from Eamon's eyes over the reality of what was happening with the FAI. And it took even after the initial revelations of the Sunday Times. And I think Eamon and John Giles fall into that category, and a lot of other ex-players, that they had experience with FAI officials over the decades, particularly in their playing careers. And it was different to John Delaney, but they were treated like cattle. Like literally they were put into cattle class on a train on one trip in Poland. They were sitting, players sat on the luggage in a special luggage carriage in the hold, whatever. And I think they just saw John Delaney as this reformer, the guy who was able to get involved, get the Aviva built, who was able to bring Trapattoni in, who looked out to ex-players. But no, we know there was a lot more to the John Delaney thing. And now I think there's a bit of rowing back going on with people who were cheerleading for him in the past. But one of the interesting things about this is in the Sunday Indo, actually, and they tried to do a spoiler, and they've done a very good spoiler because they obviously got a copy of the book from somewhere, from the publisher, from somewhere in advance.
Yeah.
And they have details that I didn't know about that the game in Gibraltar, and when it was announced that he was going to be executive vice president and a new contract had been drawn up and various bonuses tied into it. But the pressure that was put on Donald Conway and Michael Cody of the FAI by John Delaney, according to the book, to sign the contract out in Gibraltar. Like Conway was saying, we'll do this, sort out when we get back. And the contract was actually drawn up on hotel-headed notepaper, which is amazing. Like that, there was this real rush to get this brushed through, which is extraordinary. And the other thing, all this is going on, and John Delaney still works the sports. This stuff is out there, and it makes you question the world's professional sport that, this guy's still out there working as a consultant, even though there's a lot of accusations over his head, or a lot of stuff has come out about the way things were done on his watch in the FAI. So I hope this book does very, very well, because I think there's been a bit of a weariness with the story, because it's been going around for a while now, and particularly when it got very technical in terms of the details of corporate governance, etc. But it's very worth reminding ourselves what this is all about, how it has brought Irish soccer to its knees, how it's landed with huge debt that will cause a big, big problem for a long, long time. And, it can't be forgotten and it can't be allowed to happen again.
Mick, it strikes me that me and you may have been the only people that weren't invited to the 50th birthday party, such as the laundry list listed today by Mark Tighe and Paul Rowan in this piece as well. But it shows that there is an appetite still for this stuff to be consumed. I guess a book is going to take all that in, because people are going to have to want to consume it in one big go and almost read it with their chins in the ground. But it's like the after effects are still being felt, and no more so when you see I guess the introduction of Stephen Kenny last week as the senior football manager, and the reaction to him. Eamon Sweeney has a piece on the back of the Sunday Independent today, talking about the reaction to Stephen Kenny's first game in charge. Essentially 4 training sessions, and the knives were out for him with the likes of Jason McAteer and Ian Hart, and then latterly Noel King, the former Republic of Ireland women's and under-21 manager, who said it's all about winning and losing, and Stephen Kenny will soon find out where he stands and all of that. Like, we talked about impatience earlier on, and the social media rabble kind of piling on people, but the Kenny era definitely strikes me as being a very clean break for everything, and a chance for the old regimes that were funded from outside and all that kind of thing to kind of move on and kind of create something new here.
They needed to be drawn in the sand. Just what you were saying about even like Jason McAteer and Noel King and a few more, like that's working in the media. That's those guys coming out with even some outlandish statements, or saying that he's going to be under pressure like that. That's ensuring that they're going to keep a job within the media, because we want people to say things and have an opinion, I suppose. But Stephen Kenny, I think it's definitely exciting going forward. As I said, I'm not a massive soccer fan, but just reading into his philosophies on the game, the way he wants the game played, I don't think you could have thought that on his first couple of games, as I said, with a handful of training sessions under his belt, that we're going to see something revolutionary. All you want to see is that they're trying to be attack-minded, that they're trying to be progressive in the way that they play. I think we've gotten used to the kind of the long ball style and what we'd seen even in the early 90s, obviously a more maybe modernised version, but we want to see an Irish team playing the way we think we should be playing, and that's passing the ball around and trying to create opportunities. And I think it's an exciting time. I think when he gets a lot more time with the players, gets time to kind of bed in his philosophies, it's definitely going to be interesting. But as you said, with the extracts from Champagne Football and massive, unbelievable work done by Mark Tighe and Paul Rowan, there's definitely still an appetite to read exactly what happened, because the details, more and more details keep coming out, and it's more and more staggering as you read it. And just even looking at the picture here of John Delaney and Emma English together, and you have the revolver, the James Bond revolver pointing at the two of them. Yeah, which is maybe symbolic of what was going to happen over the next couple of years and what is happening at the moment. I thought it was staggering as well, just to read the last line on the front of the Times, just the kind of the news piece that Mark Ty and Paul Rowan had. It was just contacted in July. Delaney's solicitor Aidan Eames said, "Please do not contact this office in relation to this or related matters, as we will not respond." Delaney left the FAI a year ago with an exit package worth $462,000. He is now working in London and has established a management consultancy firm, Outperform Now, which I just think is somewhat bizarre. He's obviously creating a new life for himself, but this story is always going to be played out, and it's obviously going to get an awful lot of time with this book as well, which is it's an exciting kind of look back through unbelievably turbulent times in the FAI.
Yeah. Kieran, were you surprised at how vicious some of the stuff was against Kenny on social media from people who you would figure should know better? As Eamon Sweeney points out here in this Indo, he says Hart's implied scepticism about the wisdom of blooding youngsters seems odd for a man who got his own first cap at the age of 18 in 1996. When Hart made his debut against Croatia, Ireland were in the middle of a run of 7 matches without a win, largely because Mick McCarthy was introducing new players after taking over from Jack Charlton. I mean, that kind of hits the nail on the head.
I'm not surprised at all, to be honest, Richie, because I suspect the way Ian Hart and Jason McAteer, whatever, look at the world is, back then, Mick McCarthy was an Ireland captain and an Ireland legend. He'd been captain of the World Cup quarter-final. He played for Ireland for a long time. He played for Celtic. He played for Manchester City. So he had a pedigree they understood. They don't understand or don't want to understand Stephen Kenny's pedigree. You know, to them, I think that they look at the League of Ireland as a backwater. They look at Dunfermline as a backwater team in a backwater league, and they don't give much credence to his CV. And I think they've been very quick. There are people within Irish soccer who commentate in Irish soccer who hold to that view, and Brian Kerr had to deal with it as well. He was battling against it from the start. But Brian had he had more established players to work with. Like he had Robbie Keane and Richard Dunn and Damien Duff and John O'Shea when they were around the prime of their careers. Like, so to a large extent, Stephen Kenny's trying to mould a new team. And I think, there's a lot of calls for patience, but I think he's in a very difficult situation because the first 2 games result-wise didn't go well. To qualify for the Euros, you need to win 2 away games. Owen Cowes has written about this in The Sun, and against non-minnow teams, Ireland haven't beaten 2 away teams in a row in I think well over a decade. I can't remember the figure he used, but and if he doesn't qualify, like people say, okay, it's not his fault. He came straight into the game, but he did want, he could have let Mick McCarthy finish that campaign, but he wanted in then, so he has to be. People will say it's fair to judge him on that. When you go into the World Cup qualifiers, only 13 from Europe qualify compared to 24. For a European Championship. It's very, very hard for a country like Ireland to qualify for a World Cup. So I think he won't get the kind of I don't think he'll get the honeymoon that he needs to rebuild a new team. Like you look at the comparison with Northern Ireland, which is interesting because Michael O'Neill's background was managing in Scotland and managing the League of Ireland. So it's a very similar CV. His first couple of games were 2 friendlies, lost them 3-0 and 6-0. I think his first 11 games, he only won 2 of them, and I think they were against Luxembourg, the 2 that he won. So he had a very difficult start, and he turned it around. They nearly qualified for a World Cup. They went to the last 16 of Euros. They're back in the Euros playoff before he went to Stoke. But I think the critical difference there is Michael O'Neill wasn't trying to ultimately change a culture. Like he was making Northern Ireland very hard to beat. They capitalise on the chances they did get, and set pieces especially, and get them very organised. But Stephen Kenny is trying to put a very distinctive stamp on an Ireland team. With like Adam Meada played both internationals. Adam Meada has played 5 up to yesterday. Come on, yesterday. Up to yesterday, he played 5. Started 5 games of senior adult football, and 2 of them were with Ireland. So there's guys that are just learning the trade that have been thrown in there. Because he has to. There's no established strikers there the last few years. He has to get on with it. So I think there'll be more people like Ian Hart and Jason McAteer coming out of the woodwork. I think there will be more sniping.
the Roy Keane factor has it seems to me feed that kind of reaction whereby if you say something outrageous, it will be picked up, and if it gets picked up, then you're going to get more media work. And I think that's the circle that a lot of ex-pros kind of find themselves in now, Michael, whereby, and this would extend to pretty much any sport, is if you say something outrageous or controversial, the more likely it is that somebody's going to ask you to say something outrageous and controversial again, and you're going to get employed to be the outrageous and controversial person. And that's the kind of circle that these players are, to a degree, happy to get stuck in.
Yeah, 100%. Be it the Sunday game, be it Premier League Live, be it whatever it is. If you say something, you're going to basically give your opinion, and your opinion could be scathing. Like, without being smart, Eamon Dunphy made a career on it. He always had an opinion, and several more like him as well. So if there definitely, as Kieran said, I think there'll be a lot of people coming out of the woodwork. You probably will hear very few people defending Kenny and backing Kenny at the moment. It's much easier to criticise, because those guys that criticise, he said, within the media, we all want someone to say something that's going to be thought-provoking. And I'd say there'll be plenty of people that won't be short of an opinion into what Kenny's doing right, what he's doing wrong. And as Kieran said as well, I think that is an important point. The fact that Stephen Kenny just didn't have a distinguished international career behind him or anything like that, it just means that the knives were already sharp. Whereas with someone like Mick McCarthy, who had a distinguished club and international career, you have a little saving grace there. You're buying yourself a bit of time. You've done it on the pitch, and I'm sure Stephen Kenny would talk about that as well. That there's always more pressure on because maybe he didn't have that distinguished career. But there'll always be people ready to sharpen the knives, and I'm sure there's going to be plenty of them ready to do so if he doesn't win the next couple of games. But I think he does need a bit of time, and there has to be a bit of patience. As Kieran said as well, you're trying to change a culture of an organisation as well, which as we see across today's Sunday papers, there's an awful lot of scars still fairly fresh from the last decade or two. Yeah.
Completely different story entirely. Moving back to the Sunday Mail, it's the story of Mark Allers sat down with Karen Leach, who was a former swimmer who swam under the disgraced coach Derry O'Rourke, and has gone on to have a really important career. This past week, Mark says she's been speaking at the Lawn Tennis Association in the UK over safety measures. She sits on the advisory panel for Sport England. She's consulted with authorities in Norway, Iceland and Canada, Germany and Spain, and she's forged a reputation in the leading international voice against sexual abuse and harassment in sport. This all comes off the back, I guess, of the podcast Where's George Gibney, put together brilliantly by Mark Horgan and Kieran Cassidy, that's been doing the rounds over the course of the last couple of weeks. And Karen's is a story that's probably all too familiar to a lot of people who would have trained under Derry O'Rourke during his terrible regime as a swimming coach back in the 70s and 80s. And there'll be a content warning around this one in case anybody's gone through any of that. But Kieran, it very much the Where's George Gibney podcast, these stories today again being reopened about Derry O'Rourke, and a discussion that needs to continue about safety in sport, particularly for young kids. Karen has her concerns about the measures that were put in place here in Ireland over the course of the last couple of weeks, where parents were instructed to stay in cars or stay waiting, outside of the gates or whatever while training's going on, because there are concerns about COVID, etc., which are warranted. But she has her own concerns that it's that kind of culture that eventually led to the situation that she found herself in back in the 80s.
Yeah, I think there was a rollback on that because, it was pointed out this was against too slick guidelines that, so I think one parent is allowed now to attend games and training for child safety reasons. But it's good that this has all come out of the open again. Like, I remember when all these stories came out in the early 90s with Karen Leach and other victims of George Gibney and Derry O'Rourke and some other paedophiles in swimming. Like, it was an extraordinary time, and some people did extraordinary work on it. Like Justine McCarthy wrote a very good book on it that's worth checking out if anybody wants to get into the story. Gary O'Toole was an absolute hero on the work he put in as a 21-year-old swimmer, going to victims and getting them to come forward and tell their stories. And Paul Kimmich flags that he's done an interview with Gary next week. He's a column on it today, and it'd be interesting to read that. But it's important, because Karen Leach mentions, safeguards for another sports here that she's not happy with. And it's important to point out this isn't just a swimming problem.
Like there's been sex abuse stories out of Irish soccer, Irish rugby, Irish basketball. We saw it in the sports media with Tom Humphreys, who was involved as camogie coach with St. Vincent, got involved with kids from another club. And like I knew Tom for 20, 25 years. I didn't know him well. And it just shows you people can hide in plain sight. He's the last person I would have thought would be involved with something like that. So I thought he was always a very moral person. And it just shows you can't know anyone. And just the dangers are right there. I think any pastime or any occupation that has access to children is a red flag. Okay, you have to red flag there to be aware of the possible dangers, and you have to have the utmost scrutiny of the people that are involved, and you have to always make sure children are never left alone with adults in those kind of situations, because this I think this podcast globally will make serious waves that Mark and Kieran have done, because it's very well put together. To some people, it's a very familiar story. To a lot of people, it's a story they're coming to new, and they're kind of baffled. Like, how is George Gibney still out there? How is he still, when all this stuff that's come out about him, how is he still at large? How was he able to get coaching jobs abroad when all this stuff was alleged against him? And like across sport, like you see all the bullying allegations across, say, gymnastics and other sports, and sexual abuse in the gymnastics in America. Like a lot of sports have treated young athletes very badly in terms of sexual abuse, physical abuse, and mental abuse. And they have questions answered. And the culture around the coaching that allowed that to happen, there's huge questions over it.
Like even going through Karen's piece today with Mark in the Mail on Sunday, she said when she first read the story of Choi Suk-hyun, the young South Korean triathlete who took her own life in June, it stopped her in her tracks. After her death, Choi's family released secret recordings that documented the years of physical and psychological abuse she had suffered at the hands of her coach and her senior teammates. Choi had reported what had happened, but to no avail. And Leach said she lit a candle and said prayers for her. It impacted me because 22 years ago I walked into a guard station in Tala to report what happened to me at around the same time that this girl was born. And this is somebody, Karen Leach, who's now worked in the sphere of child safety and trying to work for a better place for kids to operate in terms of sports. But it shows with the Gibney podcast, with the story here of Choi Suk-hyun, with the story of the American gymnast Mick, that this is a story that's ongoing and kind of morphs into different realms, different places, different forms. But it's something that needs to constantly be kept in the conversation, because it's something that will unfortunately always pop its head up.
Without a doubt, it's such a brave thing to do, to talk about something that has obviously had an unbelievable impact on their life. Just reading a part of this, that Karen Leach says, following her evidence, she spiraled into a life of self-destruction and depression. She spent 10 years in and out of St. John of God Hospital as a psychiatric patient. Direct quote, "I have taken every tablet and antidepressant, sleeping tablets, Valium, tablets to wake me up and tablets to put me asleep, tablets to stop me shaking and tablets to help me live, because I didn't want to live. All I wanted to do was die." Like, it's a really, it's such a brave and honest thing to do. And I think the one thing I'd say about, as a result of people coming out and telling their story, like the GAA has like really good safeguards around getting involved. Anybody getting involved with any teams now, you have to be Garda vetted. You're going to have to make sure you have to have all your coaching badges and things like that. I think the likelihood, we're definitely massively reducing the likelihood of any kind of potentially dangerous people getting involved with underage teams and squads and different things. There's still going to be some that will slip through the cracks, so it's massively important that the likes of Karen Leach and others keep raising this. And as I said, it's such a difficult thing for them to do, but they are having a massive effect. And she's going around talking to the Lawn Tennis Association of England, and her words and her experiences are forcing them to reassess their safeguards, their protocols. And it's not an easy thing to do, but it's definitely having a massively positive effect on an awful lot of people by telling their story. Yeah,
and again, not the easiest piece to read in terms of the content of it, but a fantastic one that absolutely needs to be told today as well. Moving on to the Sunday Times, Dennis Walsh, when you get him writing about Cork hurling, you're always pretty much onto a winner. Kieran, you wanted to bring this one up. It basically is a story centering around one of those great figures in Cork hurling going back decades now at this stage. First walked into a Cork dressing room as a young doctor in 1976. Dr. Con Murphy seemed to be one of those ever-present figures for decades pretty much, and brought back and given his due shine today in the Sunday Times by Dennis Walsh.
Yeah, because actually, I think Dennis mentions he's 70. I thought Dr. Con was actually older because he's been around so long, because he was involved in the 3 in a row with Cork in the mid-70s, which would mean he was only like early 20s then. Like, he was just a newly qualified doctor. I didn't realise he was so young back then. But he mentions the time about then because Christy Ring, there's actually a great photo of Christy Ring, who was a selector back then, and Jimmy Barry Murphy was obviously the star player, but talking to him, like, it's two absolutely iconic figures captured in the same photo. But he just talks about when they were coming out for one of the games, and just Christy Ring roared, "We are Cork, we are Cork,
we're from Cork. We're from Cork." And like,
he talked about this a few years ago. I think it's when Cork managed to get one over in Clare, and I think it might have been 99, the year that young Cork team won the All-Ireland. He said Donald Cusick and the parade was just roaring, "We are Cork, we are Cork." So this is an echo of what Christy Ring did back in the.
And just like it's so brilliantly woven, because there's talk of Christy Ring and how who was it? John Fitzgibbon wanted to emulate Christy Ring if he scored a goal against Galway in the 1990 hurling final, but as Dennis writes, by half time nothing was further from their minds. Galway were 5 points up and flying. Cork had spluttered to the end of the runway without leaving the ground. Mulcahy, this is a brilliant image. Mulcahy joined Con in the dressing room toilets where they were hosting a pop-up clinic at half-time. Cashman followed them in bewildered. Joe Cooney had run a drag with the Cork centre-back, and he was looking at Con with pleading eyes. I said to him, "I can guarantee you he won't keep it up." That was the best I could think of. And lo and behold, they go on and secure the double. But like, just a remarkable vignette of what that Cork dressing room was like. The fact that they felt they had to hold a subcommittee meeting in the jacks of the dressing room at half-time, and that was the cure for all. It seems that, and a couple of goals for John Fitzgibbon as well in the second half. But like, just a remarkable piece of storytelling, and one of those mythic figures, I guess, in Cork hurling and GAA circles as a whole.
Yeah, there's another great story, Richie. It's about another Ring story. Obviously, some of the nostalgia has probably been done to death during COVID, because a lot of people got to do look back pieces. But stuff like this, I think, is absolutely timeless, and it doesn't matter. Any amount of nostalgia will not make you not like this piece anymore. So he just says, in the early years, on-field injuries were mostly treated in private. In his first 10 years with Cork, he can only remember running onto the field once in Croke Park. But in the warm-up for the 1997 final, Shawnee O'Leary's nose was smashed by a stray slitter. His nose was half grit way across his face. Dr. Con said Ringy came in, which was not a help. He was stuffing things up his nose, and eventually he said, "Leary, you won't be hurling with your nose." Shawnee O'Leary started the game, and he stayed the course. I think he got a goal the same day as well. But that's just great stuff. Like, it was talking about Dr. Con, and Dr. Con is almost highlighting again just how revered Christy Ring was as well. And basically, like, if Ring told them to do anything, they would do it. No more than that, we are from Cork. If Ring said you're able to play, you were able to play. And someone like Dr. Con would be perfect for a book, because he's universally loved by all. Was on 3 or 4, I think, international rules teams. Went to Australia, working with them, and even like Tomás O'Shea and all the Kerry lads, who generally would hate Cork people anyway, on the pitch anyway, they all love him. And just some great stories looking back through the years. Yeah, there's
a brilliant one as well here. There's so many in it. In what is a relatively small piece as well, Kieran. He says, before the 1999 All-Ireland, Jimmy Barry Murphy wanted to do something similar on the day of the final, and he asked Con to canvass his rugby contacts for ideas. Donald Lenihan was one of his oldest friends, and between them they came up with something. We decided that Jimmy would stand at the top of the dressing room, and each fellow would come up and he'd present them with their jersey. By the time he got to the last jersey, everybody in the room was crying. Jimmy said, "What do you think of that?" I said, "We're either heroes or it's just cost us the match." It's just, there's such remarkable stuff in it. But he mentions as well the wars that went on in the 90s and elsewhere in Cork hurling, and the strikes, and how he was rang by Donald Cusack asking him to intervene, and he said he couldn't. Donald said, "You're the only guy who can solve it." I said, "I'm not prepared to take the stress of that. I'm not your man." I couldn't sleep that night, and at 3 a.m. a text arrived from Donald saying, "Yo, it's nothing, sorry for asking." But it shows how intertwined he was in the very fabric of Cork GAA that he mentions.
Yeah, you sometimes find somebody who's everybody's friend is nobody's friend. They're just two nuts. They think how can you just get on with everybody? But Dr. Khan is one of the exceptions, that everybody seemed to warm to him. It's mentioned there that the players loved him, that various managers and backroom teams loved him. He got on very well with Frank Murphy, who was such a dominant figure in Cork for hurling for so long. And these were all. He got on with people who were sometimes at war with each other, and he minded about the appetite for conflict, or just as a genuinely nice man, he just wanted to get on with people. But it's interesting. He talks about how the impact of COVID on himself, because he is, as he says, such a people person. And he found it hard, his 3 sons waving through the window at him, that they weren't able to visit him. And he said it did affect his own mental health. We'd written about it. He talked to somebody in an interview with it a few months before that it would impact on people's mental health. He didn't really expect it would impact on his own, but he says he found the whole isolation part of it very difficult. It
touches on something as well, we get a sense of, and I know something here that you're liable to take the piss out of at any moment, which is that word Corkness. But we do see it written through this piece in that there's something different about them down there in Cork, to put it mildly. There is that intangible in the air that has made the difference.
I genuinely think there is such a thing. There's Sean O'Phelan, the short story writers in Cork, and he had something about, Cork, they've flint, they've spark, the spark of fire, they've steel in them, and the smilers are the worst. And I've often found that with Cork, the smilers are the worst. But they are very, you look at the personalities of people as diverse in ways. There's Ron O'Gara, Roy Keane, Sonia Sullivan, Dermot O'Rourke, Vincent O'Brien in the horse racing back in the day. And there are similarities. Christy Ring, if you read about him, is the personality most akin to Roy Keane, if anyone you come across. If you read what he used to say, it could be Roy Keane talking. And it does seem to have contrariness and a drive, a pride in the place that sets it apart. That's why that really highlights, going 15 years without a hurling all-out. It's just, it doesn't sit well with Corkness. That's for sure.
Is it like an almost tangible thing, Mick? You would have noticed it more in the field, I guess, than the rest of us.
Yeah, the only word I can use to describe it, and it's not accurate, but there is a type of arrogance, and I don't mean that in a necessarily bad way. It's a swagger, this kind of a confidence about them, probably I don't know what you call it, a superiority complex, and they do kind of buy into that, and that's why, as Kieran said, it must be very, very difficult to take that it's 15 years since they've won a football, or since they've won a hurling All-Ireland, 10 years since they've won a football All-Ireland. But there is just something about them, that kind of innate confidence that they have, and it's hard, very, very. It's one of these things that's very, very hard to describe, but it is definitely there.
Yeah, Mick, anything else you wanted to bring up? I know you wanted to touch on a bit of racing before we shut off.
Yeah, massive weekend of racing. Irish Champions weekend, obviously on today, but just the O'Brien dynasty, I just like to touch on again. Aidan O'Brien won the Irish Champion Stakes yesterday. Magical beat the world's highest rated horse in Guyot yesterday. It was Ballydoyle beating Godolphin, or Coolmore beating Godolphin, which is another massive one. But Joseph O'Brien, who's still only 27, and it's amazing to think what he's achieved outside of the saddle already. He won the English St. Leger yesterday, and there's so many little kind of lines into that story. Shane Cross, who's an apprentice jockey, who's gotten on unbelievably well with Joseph in the last couple of years. He was champion apprentice in 2018. He actually tested positive for COVID on Friday. He was asymptomatic. He wasn't showing any symptoms or anything like that, so he couldn't fly out to Doncaster to take the ride, and ended up missing out on what would have been the biggest payday of his career, and probably would have shot his name into lights. And Tom Marquand took over. Funnily enough, Tom Marquand, who was jocked off English King in the Epsom Derby, so that Frankie Dettori could ride that horse. It's funny how these things work back out. But just Tom Marquand was just talking about Shane Cross here, and he said, I can't stress enough how bad I feel for Shane. This is in the Racing Post, because we've all been in a situation where things haven't gone our way, and we're both relatively young, so I can relate. He'll be sat at home in pieces, no doubt. And I guess the one thing in racing is that it always comes back around, so no doubt he'll have his day. I look forward to seeing him do it. And like, Tom Marquand is probably the best man that could say something like that to Shane Cross, because he's had his bad days. and got back on top. But an interesting one, Tom Marquand is going out with Holly Doyle, who's absolutely blazing the trail for not just female jockeys, but just jockeys in general. She had a 4-timer there a couple of weeks ago and a 5-timer. She's had a couple of big kind of stake successes as well. And they're kind of, it's under the radar maybe at the moment, but they could easily be like English sports or British sports power couple over the next couple of years if they both keep going as they are. But massive days racing at the Curragh today as well. Yeah. 4 Group 1s and 3 Group 1s at Longchamp today as well, with loads of Irish interest as well.
It was something that I brought up when we were doing during the whole lockdown thing, and we were doing the Mount Rushmores here, and Wexford came around, and I mentioned Aidan O'Brien had to be in contention for it, and the lads almost shot me down, just almost for siring the 2 lads as well, between Joseph and Dunica, because they're going to go on and be top trainers as well. Like, that family is absolutely incredible, and I don't think gets the, outside of racing circles, doesn't get the due here, and I guess that they're probably owed.
Yeah, well, I think non-racing fans don't give racing enough credit, and maybe racing fans give it too much credit. Somebody might make that counterpoint, but I think with the O'Briens, there are people that will say, "I should look at the money that behind them and the horses are given." You still, you can say that with another sports, managers, coaches, trainers had a lot of money behind it. You still have to do it. You still have to perform. You have to do it consistently. So they do deserve enormous credit. All of the O'Briens. One piece, just in case we don't mention it, I think is easily the best pieces today, is Brendan Fanning's piece on Leo Cullen, which is probably the longest piece in any paper today, and it's on the Independent. I've just gone into what Leinster have done. Like, Leinster, they're just a powerhouse now in world rugby, and so important in Irish rugby, that players from Leinster are now going to the other 3 provinces. Like
41% of players are now, other provinces have emanated from Leinster. And the scary thing about Fanning's piece for me was that
rugby nicknames are usually off. But Geordie Murphy's gone to Ulster. Now he's known as Nordy Murphy, which I think is one of the better rugby nicknames.
Listen, it makes a break from 40% of being called Hugo.
But Aidan O'Brien not getting enough credit, but Stuart Lancaster rightly is getting a lot of credit what's happened with Leinster. But Leo Cullen has been massive, and he's the guy who brings Lancaster in. He has the humility not to want to be taken, to allow a guy who was a proven head coach at international level. Some people would just be thinking, no, this guy will steal my thunder. But he was just his eye in the big picture. And if you look at Leo Cullen's record, both as a player and as a coach, he's just outstandingly successful. And the moves he's made, like, I kind of forgot about it when Graham Henry came in for a brief period for 5-figure sum, they said. But he Brendan mentions in the piece the impact that had in Johnny Sexton. And it was done in a very subtle way. They got him to give him a lift for 40 minutes one day and just chat to him. And apparently it had a big impact on Sexton. Like, there were little markers that were hit all the time. And even the way they've used a school system, which is often an abused one, but they've broadened it out beyond the top 6 schools. But the schools now are very they're really very much, so many schools now are conveyor belts into the Leinster academies and into the Leinster system, and Leinster consistently producing top class players who end up having careers maybe not with Leinster but with the other 3 provinces or abroad.
Yeah, it's a brilliant piece. There's so much in it. The scary thing for me about that piece was the amount of pushy parents that seem to be pushing their kids in schools towards the good programmes. And essentially that's what Leinster is being fueled by now, is by a lot of parents who want to see their kids do better.
There's a little sidebar with the training programme of Newbridge College for a week. I know, and a lot of those will be Leaving Cert students. And people talk about, GAA players at inter-county level have too much on their plate. And you're looking at that 17, 18-year-olds, what they do in terms of field sessions, gym sessions, recovery, etc. Plus studying for their leaving. Like, it's amazing.
Yeah, incredible stuff. Lads, thanks so much for taking time out today for the pay-per-view. Nick Fernie from the Irish Independent, Kieran Cunningham, Chief Sports Writer with the Irish Daily Star. Thank you.